Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Now we are in the chapter 14, market for factor inputs. Now before we go into detail, I would like to recall back what you have learned in principle of microeconomics. In the principle of microeconomics, I believe that you have learned a lot about market. So when we talk about market here, there must be demand and supply. Okay, there must be demand and supply. Okay, so here, let's say market for apple. Market for apple, the demand usually comes from buyer. Who are the buyers? The buyers are usually customers or household. And then who supply the apples? The apples are supplied by firms or farmers. Okay, but in this chapter 14, we are talking about market for factors or inputs. In the market for factors or inputs, the factor itself, we must understand that it is used in the production process to produce goods and services. So who use factor to produce goods and services? Obviously, firms use factor to produce goods and services. Therefore, in order to get factors so that firm can produce goods and services out of these factors, the firm must purchase the factors or inputs. Therefore, in the market for factor or inputs, the demand comes from firms. What about the supply? In order to understand where the supply comes from, you need to understand what are the factors. From your principles of microeconomics, you already knew that the factors are four, namely labor, entrepreneur, capital, and also land. Okay, so who are the suppliers of factors of production? Obviously, the suppliers comes from household individuals. Okay, so household supply factors and firm demand factors. So when it comes to the discussion of market for factor input, don't be confused with market for output, yeah? Now, next, these are the outlines of the chapter. So we're going to look at the competitive factor markets, equilibrium, and then factor markets with monopsony power and also monopoly power. We will, study the three different factor market structures. Number one is perfectly competitive factor markets. Number two, market in which buyers of factors have monopsony powers. Now, monopsony power, you have learned it before, but this time when we talk about market of factors, who are the buyers? Again, I told you earlier, the buyers are firms. So firm have monopsony power because firm will buy factors from household. The third one is markets in which sellers of factors have monopoly power. Who are the sellers in the market of factors? The sellers are household. Household, for instance, they supply labor. Okay, so they have monopoly power in determining the wage rate, for instance. For your level of study, we will only look at the competitive factor markets. Okay, now before I explain further about the competitive factor markets, what I want you to understand is that recall back when we talk about market here, we have two different types of market for output and also market for factors. Okay, now for factors, the most frequently mentioned factors in the study of economics are two, namely labor and also capital. What if, all right, only one input is variable or only one factor is variable? Let's say labor. So, if labor is variable but capital is fixed, so you can understand that the period of production is actually in the short run. Okay, so now we want to look at the demand for a factor input when only one input is variable. Okay, and recall back, we want to talk about competitive factor market here. All right, now the demand for a factor input is basically the derived demand. Why? Because, all right, it is called a derived demand because it depends on two things. Okay, first, it depends on the firm's level of output. And then it depends on the cost of inputs here. All right, why it depends on the firm's level of output? It is logic because if you produce more output, then you need more input, isn't it? Then you demand more input. That's why factor demand is actually a derived demand from the level of output. Now, what about the cost of inputs? Now, you know that you want to produce more output, you want to get more input. However, inputs are not free for you. It involves cost when you get more and more. So that's why it's called derived demand, because it also depends on the cost of input. Now, in relation to a derived demand here, we also look at the what we call marginal revenue product. Okay, marginal revenue product or MRP. Okay. Now, marginal revenue product is actually additional revenue resulting from the sale of output created by the use of one additional unit of input. So, if you look here, so actually, okay, marginal revenue product, okay, the formula is here, equivalent to marginal revenue multiplied by marginal product. So marginal revenue product means, okay, when you increase one additional labor, it will give you additional output. Okay, it will give you additional output. Additional output in economic study is called marginal product of labor, isn't it? So marginal product of labor exists here. Okay. Now, after you use one additional labor to produce, additional product or marginal product, then this additional product, you bring it to the market of output, you sell it. When you sell it, it gives you what? Additional revenue or marginal revenue, isn't it? All right. So this is MRP. Okay, and that's why it's called additional revenue resulting from the sale of output, okay, created by the use of one additional unit of input, in this case labor, when capital is fixed. Now next, how do we measure the MRPL? It is the additional output obtained. Okay, additional output obtained means marginal product from the additional unit of labor. Additional unit of labor is this one. Okay, multiplied by, okay, additional revenue. Additional revenue is marginal revenue from extra unit of output. Okay, from an extra unit of output. Okay, now this important result holds for any competitive factor market. Yeah, all right, whether or not the output market is competitive. Now, let's say we have firms, producing shoes. Okay, firm producing shoes. Now, shoes here is the output. Okay. Now, to produce shoes, you need labor apart from other, inputs. But let's assume that labor in capital only. Okay, for simplicity, and capital is fixed. Okay. Now, labor here, in order for you as a firm to get labor, you need to go to the market for labor. Now, market for labor is one example of factor market. Okay. Now, like I said earlier, it has to be competitive factor market. That means labor market here, we have many buyers. That means I'm not the only firm in the market. We have many other firms demand labor. Okay. Not only that, we also have many sellers. That means we have many households offer their labor effort. Okay, that's why it's called competitive factor market. Okay, shoes or output is the product that I produce using this labor. Okay, in my factory. Now, shoes or output is in another market. We call it output market. Now, output market here, if I'm the only one who sell this specific shoes, no other people selling shoes, the same, the shoes. Now, then I become imperfect. I live in the imperfect market of shoes, or my output market is imperfect. But if I'm not the only one who sells shoes, we have many sellers in the market, then it is a competitive market. Can you see the difference now? Labor market is competitive, but after I produce shoes, my shoes can be sold perhaps in monopoly or in competitive shoes market. Okay. Now, in the competitive output market, a firm will sell all its output at the market price. Okay. Now, show this in the form of graph. Now recall back, shoes is the output, and then labor is the input. Okay, so shoes market here can be competitive, can be imperfect market, isn't it? Okay, if it is competitive, recall back what you learned in principle of micro. This is about output. The market of output, you have learned it in principle of micro. Now, if it is competitive market, let's assume that I am one firm among many firms in the competitive market. So I can see that, okay, so price is here, quantity of shoes is here. This is for my firm, one firm. Okay, and then this is for market. Okay, quantity here, price here. Then demand in the market is as usual like this. Supply in the market is as usual like this. Then the price in the market is P1. Quantity, total quantity in the market is Q1. Now, for me as a firm, if you can recall back in the principle of micro, competitive firm, I am a price taker. So I take the price in equilibrium in the market as it is. So now, I take the price as it is, P1, isn't it? Alright, so this is my demand function. Demand function equal to P1 equal to AR equal to MR, isn't it? Okay, and then I have my MC here, and then recall back what you learned here, and then we have this profit maximizing, and then Q1 here. If everybody is the same in terms of everything, including cost and whatnot, so let's say we have 100 firms. So 100 firms, each firm produces Q1. Then if it is 100 firm, it becomes Q1 equivalent to 100, small letter Q1, isn't it? Okay, so that's the idea about competitive shoe market, which is output market. Okay, now, but in the imperfect market, let's say monopoly, what you can see here is that, or any other kind of imperfect market, price is here, quantity is here, demand curve is downsloping as usual, but then MR curve is below the demand curve. Okay, because you face the whole demand curve in the market, you don't have any competitors, so the whole demand curve in the market is belong to you. Therefore, because demand is downward sloping, therefore MR is also downward sloping. Then you have MC here, and then you determine here, QM here, and then price here, isn't it? PM. This is what you learn in the principle of micro. Now, let's go back to labor or input market. However, what all of this drawing has to do with labor or input market? Okay, let's go back to this. We want to come out with the demand for labor in the form of graph. Now, the demand for labor in the form of graph is actually the marginal revenue product, okay, of labor. Okay, now, I get my labor in a competitive labor market, but I'm selling my shoes in a competitive shoes market as well. In a competitive factor market, in which the producer is a price taker, yeah? All right. The buyer's demand for an input is given by the marginal revenue product curve. Okay, the marginal revenue curve falls because the marginal product of labor falls as hours of work increases. Now, how do we explain this basically? It is actually very simple to explain. What I need to do here is that I need to show you in the form of graph. Now, in the form of graph, okay, recall back, we know that MRP of labor, marginal revenue product of labor, is actually marginal product of labor times marginal revenue, okay? And if we talk about competitive firm, okay, competitive firm, if you go back to this graph, you look here, P1 equal to D equal to AR equal to MR. This is what you learn in the first year. I'm not going to explain to you why it looks like this. You have to revise back your principle of micro, yeah? Now, so MR here for competitive shoes market is actually price, isn't it? Price equal to MR. Okay. And as you can see here, price for a firm here is P1, no change. Even if your Q is below Q, small letter Q1 here, or above small letter Q1 here, because you are price taker, you take price as it is. Unless if demand in the market increases, then you move your demand curve also upward to P2. Okay. But here, if it stay here, then it stay here also, so it's fixed in it. Okay, now let's go back to this. So here, I want to know how does MRPL for this firm look like if this firm sells shoes in a competitive shoes market. Okay, and this firm buys labor in a competitive labor market. Both factor and also product markets are competitive. Now, then I can rewrite MRPL as follows. MPL times price, isn't it? Because I'm substituting MR with price here. Now, I just want to know how does MRPL or demand for labor looks like. Okay, now price is constant, therefore MRPL here we don't know unless if we get some information about marginal product of labor. Recall back, we only have one input variable varies, that is labor. Capital is constant. So like I said earlier, when capital is constant but labor changes, that means we're talking about the short run. In the short run, when you add more and more labor into the production process, given that capital is constant, then you can see the additional product or the marginal product increase or decrease? Decrease. Then this is what we call law of diminishing return. So this one is actually decreasing. Alright. So as a consequence, because this one is constant, price is constant, MPL is decreasing due to law of diminishing return. Then MRPL for this case is also decreasing. Decreasing means what? Decreasing means downsloping. Okay. So if that is the case, then we can put it in the form of the graph here. This is labor hours, quantity of labor, and then this is wage rate. Why I put wage rate here, the explanation will come later. Okay. So I want to draw demand for labor here. Okay. The demand for labor is basically MRPL. MRPL falls down because MPL falls down and price constant. So we draw it here, down sloping MRPL equal to MPL times P, which is constant. Okay, so this is when shoes market is pure competitive, labor market is pure competitive as well, yeah? Okay, now next. I also want to draw the labor demand curve when my labor market is competitive, but my shoe market is imperfect. Market here. I sell my shoes in the imperfect market. So if it is in the imperfect market, then I'm referring to this graph. Okay. So my demand curve here is downward sloping. Recall back, my demand curve is actually price equivalent to average revenue. However, my marginal revenue is below the demand curve because demand curve is falling down. So that's what you learn in your principle, yeah? I won't explain to you further about this because you have learned it. You have to revise it again. Now, in this case, recall back. In the same graph here, I want to draw demand curve for labor, MRPL, but this time is for imperfect market. In general, the formula for MRPL is actually MPL times MR, isn't it? Now, I want to know whether MRPL for imperfect market is downward sloping, vertical line, or horizontal. So I have to check these two. Okay. From the previous graph, you can see that marginal revenue here is falling down, isn't it? And also, the same assumption, capital is fixed. The only thing that changes or the only input that changes is labor. And in the short run, as you add more and more labor into fixed capital, then one problem arises, which is law of diminishing return, isn't it? Therefore, marginal product decreases. So this decreases, MRPL also decreases. Now, that means marginal revenue product of labor for for labor market when shoe markets or output market is imperfect or maybe monopoly or monopolistic competitive market is also downsloping. But the question is, Should I draw it the same as this position of MRPL for perfect shoes market, or should I draw it above the existing MRPL, or should I draw it below? You can see in the first example here, price constant, the only thing that makes MRPL falls down is MPL. But in the second case here, in the imperfect case of output or shoes, the labor market falls down, the labor demand falls down, yeah, because of two things. Number one, MPL, number two, MR, isn't it? So that means MRPL, for this case, when shoes is in the imperfect market, must be below the first one here. Okay, MRPL equal to MPL times MR. Okay, so that's the thing. Let me fix the drawing. It doesn't look nice here. Okay, this one. Please take note that, as you can see from the previous graph, which is this, I draw quantity of labor here, which is defined in terms of hours of labor, and on the horizontal axis, and also wage rate W on the vertical axis. But the drawing of the labor demand here, which is downsloping, is called MRPL. Okay, as you can see, let me redraw again the demand curve here. Okay, so we have labor hours here, we have wage rate here, and then we have MRPL. As you can see, if I pick one point here, let's say point A, then my wage rate could be W1 and the quantity of labor could be L1. At W1 here, it hits on the MRPL itself at point A when labor is at L1. That means at point A here, W1 is equivalent to MRPL, isn't it? Now, also, if I pick another point here, point B, I have W2, and then I have L2. Then this one also W2 equal to MRPL, let's say 2 or whatever it is, yeah? 2, 1, this one is 1. Okay, but if I pick one point here, call it point C, okay, or another point here, call it point D, okay. At point C here, can we say that W equal to MRPL? Obviously no, isn't it? So the question now is W more or less than MRPL? Similarly, at this point, can we say that W is equal to MRPL? Obviously not. Why? Because you can see here, this is MRPL, but your point is here. Now, the question is also the same, whether W is greater or lesser than MRPL. Okay. You can see that whenever W is not the same as MRPL, the labor demand doesn't exist, isn't it? The labor demand exists only if and only if W is equal to MRPL along the MRPL curve or demand curve for labor. Okay, so what I want you to do at home is to determine at point D which one is correct. Is it greater sign or less sign? The same thing with point C. Now, let's look at how a firm hire labor in the labor market when capital is fixed. Now, let's assume that, as usual, okay, we have a competitive labor market. We wouldn't learn imperfect labor market, yeah, or imperfect input market. We just learn a competitive, input market. So here, let's say you have, this is for firm. This diagram is for one firm, for the firm that want to hire labor. Okay, so you have quantity of labor here, and then you have wage rate here. Okay, and as usual, the demand for labor for every firm is downward sloping. Demand is very simple, yeah. Any kind of demand is always downward sloping unless it is a peculiar product or peculiar input. Okay, so downward sloping because this shows the law of demand. Now this is for one firm only. the demand. What about the supply in this graph? Now, before we talk about the supply in this graph of one firm that, want to hire labor, we need to look at the market for labor. In the market, we have many firms and we may have many households. In this graph, we only have one firm, but we have some number of households that may want to apply job in this firm. You get what I mean? So those who wants to apply job in this firm are the supplier of labor. Okay, so I put a small graph here, labor here, and then wage rate here. The demand downward sloping, demand for labor, supply for labor upward sloping as usual, because this is a market. Okay, now equilibrium is here, and then the wage rate is W star, and then the labor here is L1, total market. This is total labor. Yeah. Now, because we are in the competitive labor market, okay, the demand is always downward sloping because nobody wants to purchase at the higher price, isn't it? Now, what about the supply here? If I'm the labor who supply my labor effort, I'm the household who supply my labor effort. In the market, I can still bargain the wage through supply and demand forces. But when it reaches equilibrium, then I have to take the wage rate as it is, isn't it? Because in the competitive labor market, we are the price taker, and in this case, the price is wage. So because it is W star in the market, okay, then all the labor that wants to work with the firm here, the supply of labor here is horizontal at W star because all of them are the price taker. Now, for this firm, how to determine how many labor they want to hire given that the market wage rate is W star? Okay, it is very simple. Okay, you just need to equate the marginal revenue product of labor here with the supply of labor, okay, which is at this point. Okay, now, so L A, for instance. So if we have 100 firm which is similar in a competitive labor market, therefore this L1 is actually 100 times LA. You get what I mean? Okay, now, so here in the competitive labor market, a firm faces a perfectly elastic supply of labor as L and can hire as many workers as it wants at a wage rate W star. Recall back, when I talk about the supply of labor comes from household. Like you yourself, after you graduate, you are fresh graduate, then you want to search job in the market. And then when you go to the labor market here, then you can see that equilibrium wage rate is at W star, let's say 2,400. Yeah. When in the market, when it is 2,400, so you offer yourself, regardless your labor hour, whether you want to increase it or decrease it, for every hour you receive, let's say 2,400, which is W star here. So you are just price taker. Okay, you are a household, you just price taker. Okay, the firm's demand for labor is given by its marginal product of labor, which is downsloping here. Any demand curve must be downsloping most of the time in the normal situation. Now, the profit maximizing firm will hire L star. L star here in my graph refers to LA, okay, of labor at the point where the marginal revenue product of labor is equal to the wage rate here, which is star, W star. Okay. Now we want to see what happens if there is a shift in the supply of labor for a firm. Okay. Now before we talk about a firm, we go back to the market. Let's draw the market for labor here. And it is competitive. Labor here, and then wage rate here. Demand for labor looks like this. Supply for labor looks like this in a competitive market. Initially, it's at W1 and also L1. Okay, so because for a firm, this is for market, yeah. This is for firm. So we have labor here, and then we have wage rate here. Demand for labor as usual, MRPL. Okay, and then the supply of labor, because in the market it is W1. So the household who wants to work with firm must take W1 as it is. So we have supply of labor supply 1, W1 here. Okay, then here we have L1. Okay, now, so let's say supply of labor, okay, shift to S2. Okay, so let's say supply of labor shift to S2 here. All right, now, but before we talk about the firm, one firm here, let's say in the market, it just so happens that, okay, supply shift to the right because of certain reason. Let's say baby boom or whatever it is. All right, or whatever it is. Now, supply increases in the market here, total people who are employed becomes L2, increases, yeah? And then the wage rate falls down to W2. What happens for the firm here? Then there will be influx of a group of household who wants to work with firm here. So the supply will shift downward from S1 to S2. Shift downward means shift more to the right. So move to W2. Okay. And then, sorry, this one should be LA, LB, yeah. But here, LB, LA. So it's synchronized with the statement. Okay, now, so here, from A to B, from A prime to B prime. Okay, so this is the implication of a shift in the supply of labor. In the market looks like this, for a firm looks like this. Okay, recall back that we know MRPL is actually equivalent to MPL multiplied by MR. Now what we need to do is that let's divide this expression both sides by MPL, or marginal product of labor. What we're going to get is this. So how do we do it? So we know that MRPL equals to MPL, okay, times MR. Then we divide by MPL also. And then this one we divide it by MPL also. This one cancel. Then we are left with MR equal to MRPL over MPL. Okay. Now we know that, okay, based on the demand curve here, MRPL is always equal to W if we want to hire the labor, isn't it? If we want to demand labor. So we can replace this by W. Okay. Now when we replace it by W, then it becomes like this. Yeah, I write it here in this space. W over MPL must be equivalent to MR. Okay. So this is actually expression 3 here. Okay. Now next, what does it mean here? Then we already got have these results. But what does it mean? What is the economic intuition behind these results? So equation 3 actually shows that both the hiring and output choices, yeah, how many labor we want to have, how many hours of labor we want to hire, how many quantity we want to produce, yeah, in our firm, both of them follow the same rules. Okay, inputs or outputs are chosen so that marginal revenue, yeah, is equal to, this marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So W over MPL is actually marginal cost of producing additional product. So how do we know? Marginal product of labor is one additional product. One additional product, you have to pay one additional wage rate, unit wage rate, isn't it? So this is actually marginal cost. Okay. Now, this principle holds in both competitive and non-competitive market of output. Okay. Regardless where do you want to sell your shoe, whether in monopoly market or in pure competitive market. Okay, these results hold in both types of market. Next, we want to look at the demand for a factor input when several inputs are variable. So let's say now we allow labor and also capital to move. So when we allow labor and capital to move, that means we are having long run situation for production. Okay, now, so this is the graph. Let's put W here and quantity of labor in terms of labor hours here. And let's say the original or the initial demand curve for labor is MRPL1. Okay, so let's say currently the price is at 20 per hour, $20 per hour or 20 pound per hour. Let's say we have L1 here, and then let's say this is point A, okay, or capital A. I should use capital A then. Okay, capital A. Okay, now, so here we are at point number 2. When the wage rate is at $20, A represents 1 point of the on the firm's demand for labor, which is at point E here. Yeah? Okay, so let's say suddenly, okay, wage rate falls to 15. If wage rate falls to 15, let's say 15 here. Okay, then basically we are moving from point A to B along the MRPL, along the demand curve. So there is a movement along the demand curve because price changes. This is law of demand, isn't it? Now, so you can see here, the number of labor hired becomes more, isn't it? Because now it is relatively cheaper to hire labor than before. Okay, so given that you are in the long run, when you hire more labor, so it seems that relatively speaking, the number of laborers is more than the number of capital. So you have, more labor than capital. Now, because in the long run, it is possible for you to increase the number of capital machines, isn't it? So that every labor can have, can use machine. Okay. Now, at this moment, when you don't have enough capital or machines, um, because you have many laborers that need more machine. At that particular time, if you allow labor to receive more machine and use machines more, then the production from machine can increase. When I say the production from machine can increase, it refers to the additional product produced by machine can increase if you add more machine at that particular point. Okay, so that's why it says here, where the wage rate falls to $50, the marginal product of capital rises. MPK rises. Now, when marginal product of capital rises, then capital now becomes more productive. Okay, labor needs more capital, machines, so that labor can use more machine to produce more. All right. Then this leads to the encouragement to the firm to rent more machinery and hire more labor. Now, they want to hire more machine. Hire more machine, you need more labor to use machine, isn't it? To switch on the machine. Now, can you see? You want to hire more labor. Currently, the price is at 15. Previously at L2, isn't it? After the falls in the wage rate. But now, because you hire more machine, you need more labor. But the price is at 15. Okay. You need more labor. You need more labor means you move to the right. Here, let's say L3, isn't it? L3 is at point C. Point C is no longer at the same demand curve or MRPL1. It must be on the new demand curve for labor. So that new demand curve for labor could be something like this. Okay. So this one is MRPL2. Okay. Now can you see from A to B, the determinants is wage rate falls. So that's why it's movement along the curve. Now, from B to C is the shift, isn't it, in the demand curve? Why? Because you have more machine, you need more labor because of more machine in the factory. Okay, you run more machine in the factory. That means the determinant is not because of wage rate. The determinant is because of capital. That's why you have the shift in labor demand here from B to C, although the price or the wage rate is staying the same at 15. Now, in the long run, it's actually from A to B, B to C. So we join A to B. You have to be very straight line, and mine is not very good here. Let me erase it. So from A to C, okay, then we have demand for labor which is flatter than the one that we have in the short run. This one is short run, this one is short run. Collection of many short runs become long run like A to C. Okay, so as a result, the MRP curve shift from MRP L1 to MRP L2, generating a new point C on the firm's demand for labor curve. Okay, point C here. Thus A and C are on the demand for labor curve, but B is not. Okay, so A and C. So that's the demand for labor when, several inputs are allowed to vary. What about the market demand curve? When we talk about the market demand curve, then we are referring to the industry demand curve. So in order to explain this, we use these two graphs. Okay, so the first graph here is meant for a firm. Okay, and the second one is meant for market or industry. So we have wage rate here, we have number of labor here in terms of hours, wage rate here, and then labor hours here. Okay, so let's say initially the demand curve for labor for a firm is this one, MRPL1. Okay, let's say the demand curve for industry looks like this also. Okay, so this is demand curve for industry. All right, now let's say initially the price is here at $15. So in the industry also at $15. Of course, I don't put supply curve here, yeah. Otherwise, it becomes a mess for this market or industry. Okay, so this one is point A. So let's say in the market, the price or the wage rate falls down. Let's say from 15 to 10. Let's say 10 is here. Then B is here. We are talking about movement along the demand for labor curve. Alright, so initially it was here, let's say 100. Now it becomes here, let's say 120. Now this one here in the market, let's say L1 initially. But because the falls in wage rate, then in the industry also, we are moving from point A, capital A, to point B here. Let's say L2 here. However, recall back, yeah, MRPL is actually MR times, MPL, isn't it? And because we have assumption that output is in the competitive market, then MR here can be replaced by P. Okay, MR here can be replaced by P. Now, let's go back to this analysis. For from here, when wage rate falls down to, let's say, 10, the cost of production also falls down, isn't it? The cost of production also falls down. Now, when the cost of production also falls down, then it enables the firm to sell the product at the cheaper price relatively than before. So what happens to the price here? Cheaper means price of product going down. When price of product going down, what happens next? You look at MRPL, it's actually equal to P times MPL, isn't it? So price falls down, okay? Then, of course, marginal revenue will fall, okay? Even if wage rate stay the same at 10. So, that means, okay, MRPL will shift to the left for a given wage rate, let's say somewhere here, okay? So, it must pass through this dot point, then it becomes MRPL2, and then this one point C, and then this one 110, for instance. Okay, now, so that's the implication. MRPL shift to the left from MRPL1 to MRPL2 at point C. What about the industry here? This one is done, yeah. When price of labor or wage rate falls down from 15 to 10, okay, then we are moving along the industry demand for labor curve. However, at the same time, price falls down because the cost of production has fallen down, isn't it? Which is falls down, a fall in wage rate. Now, because the demand is MRPL, so now for the same wage rate, the demand here will be somewhere lesser here. Okay, let's say L3. Okay, let's say L3. Okay, now initially it was here, now it is here, call this 1.6. So when you join the 2 point, you get another demand curve. This is demand curve for industry, DL prime, when price changes like this. But when price doesn't change, it is at DL initially, isn't it? Alright. For the firm, when price changes, price of output, price of shoe changes, MRPL shift to the left. So we are moving from MRPL1 to MRPL2. But for industry, it fans inward from DL to DL prime. Okay, so you can see that the industry demand curve, when price changes, is highly inelastic compared to when price doesn't change, like in DL. This graph here, we want to talk about the market of an input, and in the second graph here, we want to talk about the firm, demand and the supply of the input to this firm. Now, instead of talking about labor as an input, we want to talk about raw materials. Let's say we are talking about one kind of input for producing clothes, and that input is basically fabric. Okay, so we have the price of fabric here, and then we have the yard of fabrics. Okay, how many yards? So this is for market or industry. Here we have the price of fabric, and then here we have the yards, the measurement of fabric. Usually in Malaysia we use meters, but in some countries, especially America, they use yards. Okay, now in the market, demand for fabric is always downsloping, isn't it? And supply of fabric is always upsloping. So the price in the market is, let's say here, let's say 10, okay, $10. And then we have total, equilibrium quantity in the market is 100. Now, we have many firms in the industry because this is a competitive industry. However, in the second graph here, we use one graph to represent one firm, and these other firms are homogeneous. For instance, they need this fabric to produce a good, let's say clothes. Okay, so as usual, they demand fabric so that they can use this fabric to produce clothes or to sew clothes. And logically speaking, nobody wants to have higher price for fabric if they want to purchase. So as a consequence, demand for fabric is actually given by demand here, fabric, okay, equivalent to MRP fabric. Okay, usually we have MRPL, but this time because we use raw materials, so we have MRPF. Okay, now demand is downsloping, but you look at the market here, who supply the fabric? The seller of fabric. There are many sellers of fabric, so the market price is 10, so they have to take the price that it is, so they supply the fabric at the price of 10. So when they supply the fabric at the price of 10, so the supply is this one, supply of fabric. Now, regardless the quantity of fabric they want to supply to this firm, let's call this firm A, then the price that they have to sell is 10 per yard. Okay, now because they are price taker. Now their supply, they get revenue, but the $10 here is actually expenditure for this firm, the firm that uses fabric to produce clothes. Now, so because of that, then the supply curve here is actually the price of fabric in the market that they have to take also, and then they have to pay to the supplier. Therefore, this one behave as marginal expenditure or aggregate expenditure to the firm that purchased fabric. Okay, now average expenditure and marginal expenditure, as you can see, is horizontal. Why? Because they just take the price as it is in the market, the price of raw materials. Okay, so the determination of how many yards this firm want to purchase from the market is basically following this condition. So you must have MRPF must be equivalent to marginal expenditure. Okay, so marginal benefit equals to marginal cost here. To the firm that purchase fabric, every additional fabric yards that they purchase, they have to incur additional expenditure, which is marginal expenditure. But because the price is 10, regardless for each yard, regardless the total yards you want to purchase or this firm wants to purchase, therefore marginal expenditure is constant throughout the level of yards. And the price is constant, therefore average expenditure is also constant, and horizontal line like this, which is actually supply of fabric curve. Okay, so MRPF equal to ME is actually at the intersection here, call it point A. This one is point A prime. Okay, then we have it here. Let's say I'm just making up the number 50. Okay, so this one is $10. Okay, so this is what I said just now. So average expenditure curve, we have seen the average expenditure curve. It is actually the supply curve representing the price per unit that a firm pays for a good, and in this case, the good is actually raw materials, which is fabric. On the other hand, when we talk about another term here, marginal expenditure curve, it is a curve that describes the additional cost of purchasing one additional unit of raw materials, in this case, fabric. Okay, so for this firm to decide how many yards of fabric this firm needs to purchase in order to produce clothes so that this firm can always maximize profit. So this firm must follow this condition, which is in expression 4. Marginal revenue product equals to marginal expenditure. And like I said earlier, we are talking about the comparative case. The condition here for profit maximization is that the price of input, of input be equal to marginal expenditure. In our case here, we use fabric, isn't it? So our marginal expenditure must be equivalent to MRP fabric, isn't it? And MRP fabric here is actually the price of fabric, which is 10, isn't it? So here, ME equal to PF. But in the case of labor, because all this will be previously, we use labor as the input. In the case of labor, MRP here refers to wage rate, isn't it? When it is competitive case, because you learn that MRP must equal to wage rate. In the downsloping, this is wage, this is MRP, isn't it? So we can substitute it by putting wage here. That's why we have marginal expenditure equal to wage. So for fabric, I compared here, marginal expenditure equal to the price of fabric. This is the price of raw materials import. This is the price of labor import. Okay. Now, another thing that we want to look at is there is another important feature that you need to understand when we talk about the market supply of inputs. And this is specifically for labor. Labor is a human resource and it has its own, unique or distinctive features or characteristic. So what is that distinctive feature? I'm sure most of you have heard this in the intermediate micro 1, and this is basically backward banding supply curve. Okay, so let's see which rate is here. The number of labor hours is here. Okay, usually when the wage rate increases, the hours of work supply initially will increase, isn't it? Because it gives you motivation to work more, because now you can gain more, income. But sometimes there's a point, because we are human beings. Yeah, if you work too much, you only have 24 hours. Okay, even if the wage rate increases from, let's say, $10 to, let's say, 200, but you already work for about 12 hours, would you rather spend more hours per day in order to get this 200 per hour? Let's say you work 24/7. Nobody can do that. Our body, will, we will fall sick anyway. So yeah, that's where the backward banding supply of labor comes into the picture. Okay, So let's talk about the usual supply region first. So usually it looks like this, isn't it? So here in this segment we can see supply curve is upsloping. It means when the wage rate increases, then labor hours increases. Okay. Then in this case, we have what we call substitution effect. Dominates income effect. Okay. Now, how it occurs? So basically, when wage rate increases, okay, it leads to substitution effect more than income effect. Okay. And when wage rate increases for this region, the person who have two choices in his life, either to spend more time for leisure or work, will find that price of leisure, relatively speaking, is higher after wage rate increases. Why? Because if you spend too much time for leisure, you feel that you're losing something, which is income, isn't it? So that's the price of leisure. Okay. So because of that, you try to substitute. So you work more, you have lesser leisure time. So when you work more, that means relationship between wage rate and working is positive. That's why we have upsloping supply curve. Okay. Now, on the other hand, okay, if you work too much and you have spent per day more than what you can, for instance, usually you work for 8 hours, suddenly you add another 6 hours, it becomes how many? 14 hours. So you are left with how many hours to rest and do some other stuff? Only 8 hours. Then you feel that why do you need to suffer? So let's say when wage rate increases, okay, even if you don't spend more hours, okay, you spend the same hours like before, you can see that your total income will be more, isn't it, without putting more effort in terms of hours. Okay. So because of that, that's why you reduce working hours, you spend more leisure, because you know that without spending too much, you still can get the same amount of income. So at that particular point, you have backward bending supply curve like this. Okay. So in this region, okay, this is first region, this is second region. In the second region, the market supply of input becomes downsloping. Why? This is because the reverse happens. In particular, income effect is more than substitution effect. Okay. Now, recall back what does it mean by substitution effect? What does it mean by income effect? Okay. For substitution effect, when wage rate increases, okay, like I said earlier, you will find that the price of leisure in relative form has becomes more expensive. That means you're losing your income if you don't work more in it. All right. So because of that, okay, you increase working hour, you decrease leisure. So you have substituted, you want to work more, you reduce leisure hour. Okay. And in this case happens when income is constant. Okay. So this is substitution effect. Nevertheless, when we talk about income effect, okay, this is substitution effect. Income effect, okay, your wage increases. Okay. You'll find that by working the same hours, you will get more income in total, isn't it? All right. So in this case, what you will do is that instead of working more, you work less. Okay, you work less. You have your leisure more than the working hours. Now in this case, income effect has dominated substitution effect. We can use the utility analysis, utility or indifference curve analysis to show the substitution and income effects of a wage increase. Okay, so let's look at this frame of diagram. Let's see wage rate is here. and then let's say labor hour is here. Okay, so let's say initially the wage rate is $10 or $10. Okay, you have total time equivalent to 24. So if you work 24 hours, your total income will be 24 times 10 equivalent to 240. Okay, so here, sorry, yeah, it shouldn't be wage here, it should be income. So let's say income is here, and then this one is leisure. Okay, now, so you have your 240 here, let's say. Okay, and then you have your 24 hours maximum here, 0 hours here. So if you move to the right, you spend most of your time for leisure, because leisure move to the right. So let's say your budget line looks like this, and then so let's say your current indifference curve looks like this, and then currently you are at point A with your leisure hours from left to right is 16. So currently leisure 16. So work is what? 24 minus 16, isn't it? Which is 8 hours. Okay. Now, so this budget line is when wage rate is equivalent to $10. Okay. Now, so this budget line, we can name it as PQ. Yeah. All right. Now, so let's say now, when the wage rate increases from 10 to 30, then what happens is that, okay, budget line will shift from PQ here to RQ, okay? So, but before it shift to RQ, RQ is actually the shift on the vertical axis only, all right? Because if you don't work, you have 24-hour leisure, no matter what happens to your wage rate, your income, okay, is still 0, which is at point Q here, okay? Now, I'll draw the RQ later after I explain to you the details in the process of moving from PQ to RQ. But now, I just want to show you the substitution and income effect of the wage of a wage increase. Okay, now, so when wage rate increases from 10 to 30, then like I said earlier, the relative price of leisure is increasing because you feel like you're losing income if you don't work more. Okay, as a consequence, what you'll do is that you reduce leisure and then you work more. Okay, so if you still use the same budget line here, the same indifference curve here, okay, then probably you move to the left from point A to, let's say, point C here. Okay, now when you move from point A to point C, now this what happens, then it should lie on the what we call, I'm sure you have heard this, imaginary budget line. Let's call this imaginary budget line ZY. So at point C here, you can see the number of hours of leisure is reduced from 16 to 12 after the wage rate increases from 10 to 30. Okay, so in this case, you can see leisure hours is only 12. And then how many hours for working? So it's equivalent to 24 minus 12, equivalent to 12 hours, isn't it? So you can see there's an increase in, number of hours worked. Initially, it was 8. Now it becomes 12. Okay. Now, what happens here is that from A to C is basically substitution effect. Okay, substitution effect. But at the same time, like I said earlier, when wage rate increases, there will be income effect as well. Okay, now, so recall back you have imaginary budget line here because you move from point A to C, so you have imaginary budget line ZY. Now, after it moves from PQ to ZY, we want to explain the income effect. The income effect is very simple. in the form of graph here, then budget line ZY will shift to the right. Okay, will shift to the right from ZY to RQ. Okay, what kind of shift? Parallel shift. So R is here, Q is here. So it will shift to the right. This. Now, how it shifted to the right? So because when wage rate increases, okay, you'll find, like I said earlier, even if you don't work more, you stay the same with the current labor hours, okay, you'll find that your income is increasing because of the increase in wage. But no change in income initially, isn't it? It's just a change in wage rate. Okay, now because of that, that's why the budget line shift to the right from ZY to RQ. Now, because you have higher budget line, therefore, it allows you to have higher indifference curve in it. Okay, so let's say you can put anywhere your higher indifference curve, the new indifference curve, but let's say I want to put it here. So let's say here. Okay. So let's say point B. Okay. And then I have my, hours here. Okay. For instance, at this point, here is 19. So moving from C to B. Okay. As we move from C to B, you can see that leisure hour is 19. What about the working hour? Is 24 minus 19 is only 5, which is explained in point number 2 here. So what happens here is that we move from C to B. I have explained to you the income effect basically. So from A to C, you can see the reduction in leisure hour because of substitution effect dominates income effect. Okay, but then after that from C to B, you move to the right here from 12 to 19. Okay, and then the net change is actually initial change is A, the final change is B. So the net change is here between 16 and 19, isn't it? Between 16 and 19, what you can see is that the increment in terms of leisure hours. So after the increase in wage rate, okay, then you can see the reduction in hours work arises because the income effect outweighs the substitution effect. Now, in this case, the labor supply or the labor supply curve is backward bending. Okay, so here income effect is more than the substitution effect. Next, we move to competitive factor market. We want to find the equilibrium here. Let's say we use labor market. Okay, so as usual, we have wage rate here, and we have, let's say, number of workers instead of labor hours. Okay, so as usual, demand curve is downward sloping, demand for labor, and it's also known as MRPL. And supply curve is upward sloping. So the determination of wage rate is very simple. It is at the intersection between supply and demand for labor. So the wage rate is here, WC, and the number of labor is LC, for instance. So let's call this point A. Okay. Nevertheless, let's assume that, okay, we have labor in the labor market, wage rate is here, number of workers, okay, and then we have a producer that sells shoes, and he sells shoes. He's the only one who produces shoes, so he becomes a monopoly, in the production of shoes, in the market of shoes. But he needs labor to produce shoes, isn't it? All right. Now, in this case, we can try to put it in the form of diagram like this. Okay. So as usual, The firm needs labor. The labor comes from supply of labor of household. So supply is upsloping as usual. Okay, remember this is monopoly, yeah. And then here we're gonna have two downsloping curves. The first one is this, and the second one is this. The first one here is price of output multiplied by MPL, marginal product of labor. This is price of shoes, yeah, that is sold in monopoly market. Okay, and then we have demand for labor, which is MRPL, and then this one is actually equivalent to MR times MPL, isn't it? This is demand for labor that producer needs to hire in order to produce shoes. Now, if you look here, how to determine how many labor we want to hire? It is always actually, MRP equal to marginal expenditure, isn't it? Now, marginal expenditure is depicted by supply of labor. So, it is at this intersection. Okay, call it point B. So, as you can see, the number of labor here, LM. Okay, but where is the, the payment for labor here? Is it at this point or is it at this point? Remember, you have producer who demand labor in a competitive market but selling shoes in a monopoly market. Okay. Now, anyway, before we decide, we need to note at this point, this is what we call marginal value of worker. Okay, and then this one here is actually the wage of worker in monopoly by monopoly firm. Okay, so you can see clearly that, okay, we know that the marginal value of a worker, the way we look at the value of the worker when they produce shoes is actually at VM here. Okay, because the way we look at their value is by looking at the price that we have to pay for shoes in the monopoly market, which is this, isn't it? However, because the producer has a monopoly power in the shoes production, but hiring labor in the competitive industry, then the payment made, okay, for labor in the competitive industry by this monopoly producer is actually lower than the value of the worker themselves. Okay, the value of the worker is here, but the wage paid to them by this producer is less, which is at WM. Okay, so that's why you can see that the amount is lower here. Now, let's look at the economic rent. Okay, so for a factor market, what does it mean by economic rent? Okay, let's begin with the graph first and we go back to the definition. So let's say wage rate is here, and then the number of workers or the labor hours is here. Labor hours is here. Okay, so as usual, demand is downward sloping equal to MRPL. Supply is upward sloping. If you see at this market for labor, okay, the wage rate in the market should be a W star. Okay, and the quantity of labor is here L star. However, you can see some of household, they are willing to supply labor below the market wage rate W star, which are here. Okay, so the difference between W star and also the wage rate that would be accepted by some of the household, which is this segment, the difference is actually the economic rent. So what's the economic rent? According to textbook, it is nothing else but economic rent is the difference between the payment made to a factor of production. So the payment made to the factor of production is W star, and the minimum amount that must be spent to obtain the use of that factor. Okay, so because equilibrium wage is at point A, okay, so you can see that the supply curve is upward sloping. Some workers would have accepted jobs for a wage less than W star. So I did mention to you this segment, isn't it? So the green shaded area in the textbook is actually ABW star. This one is actually the economic rent. What if we change the input to a land. Everybody knows that land, the quantity most of the time is fixed unless we open a new forest area. So let's say the land price is here, rent, in terms of dollar, and then this is the quantity of land. Okay, so the supply of land is usually fixed, so we have a vertical line of supply of land, but the demand is always downsloping. It's logic because nobody wants to buy land with higher price. So now the intersection is here, and then we have S1. What is S1? Economic rent per acre given by S1. So what is this area? Can you figure out what is this area? Now let's say in the market for land, the demand increases from DL to DL1 to, let's say, D2. Okay, then you can see, okay, rent per acre increases to S2. So what is this area? Okay, can you figure it out? What's the name of this area? Next, we want to look at the factor markets with monopsony power. Before we go into detail, in terms of graph, you have to understand that firm is the buyer. Who is the supplier? Suppliers are household. What are they supplying? Labor effort. Okay, labor effort. So let's say wage rate is here. Okay, labor hours is here. Okay, we know that the demand for labor is always downsloping, and it is also known as MRPL. Now, demand for labor here is also known as marginal value. Why? That's the way we value resources, isn't it? For additional labor, how much we value them. So we value them based on the wage value here. And of course, the supply of labor is upsloping in the market. Why? Because usually household will supply more if you offer them higher wage rate. And the wage rate here for the supply of labor is actually average, expenditure to the firm. Whatever being paid in terms of wage rate to the household for every hour, okay, that is actually expenditure to the firm. Okay, so we have expenditure here to the firm, or the price of labor. Now when you can see average expenditure is upsloping, so how about the marginal expenditure? In order to draw marginal expenditure, try to understand the concept of GPA and CGPA. GPA is actually your what? Your results for this semester. CGPA is the average results for the whole semester. Now, CGPA behave like average expenditure. GPA behaves like marginal expenditure. Why? Because it keeps changing from one semester to another semester. So if your CGPA is increasing, okay, this semester, that must be because last semester your GPA has increased. So like I said, your GPA is your marginal expenditure. So your marginal expenditure also increases, which is upsloping. As you can see, marginal expenditure is above the aggregate expenditure. Why? Because when it's not aggregate, it's average expenditure increases, so the additional expenditure becomes more and more higher than the previous average expenditure. So that's why marginal expenditure must be above average expenditure. Now let's go back to the the point here. We want to find the wage rate when the buyer or the firm has monopsony power over household. So how do we determine the wage rate here? To determine the wage rate, the condition is just the same. You must have marginal expenditure equals to MRP L as usual, isn't it? Where is it? The intersection is here. Okay. Now, with the intersection here, we drag down the line, then we can find the quantity of labor hours we want to hire from household by the firm. But the next question is, where is the wage rate? Should it be here or should it be here? What do you think? If you are the monopsony firm who can control the wage rate, would you prefer the first one here or the second one? in terms of paying the wage rate to the labor. For me, I prefer the second one. Why? Because I have power to pay lesser. So the wage rate for monopsony is here. Let's call it W star. Okay, and if we were to compare it with the wage rate, offered by competitive firm. So let's say the firm is a buyer and it is competitive in the labor market. Yeah, then the wage rate paid is based on supply and demand. Is based on MRP equals to AE. Okay, so it is here that this is WC. Can you see WC is higher than W star? Can you also see that LC is higher than L star? Okay. Can you also figure out how to determine WC in this diagram? Why WC has to be at the intersection between supply of labor and demand for labor? And recall back, WC is the wage rate, okay, by a competitive firm that purchase labor hours or labor effort from household. Okay, so please figure it out. Now, so here we can say that a buyer, which is the firm with monopsony power, the buyer of labor with monopsony power, maximizes net benefit, utility less expenditure, okay, from a purchase by buying up the point where marginal value is equal to marginal expenditure. What is marginal value? In this case, MRP L, isn't it, equals to marginal expenditure. But then when it comes to determination of the wage, okay, they determine it at supply curve, not at MRP or marginal value curve. Okay, so here the price is here, the price for labor in monopsony case. Okay, for a firm buying a factor input, marginal value is just the marginal revenue product or MRP of the factor. This is I already mentioned earlier here. What about bargaining power? The amount of bargaining power that a buyer or seller has is determined in part by the number of competing buyers and competing sellers. Okay, so if you have more competing buyers, then the buyers has less bargaining power, because if you try to persuade the seller to buy at a cheaper price, the seller can always go to other buyers to get higher price and earn more revenue rather than selling it to you. All right, so but it is also determined by the nature of the purchase itself, because if you buy in bulk, then perhaps you can get cheaper price and you can get more items, isn't it? Okay, we move to monopoly power over the wage rate. So monopoly power of sellers of labor. Okay, so let's say here, we talk about monopoly. In this case, the supply of labor comes from household. Okay, and those household basically have monopoly power in controlling the wage rate that they want to earn or receive from the firms. Okay, so we try to explain it in the form of graph here. Wage rate is here, and also number of workers is here. Okay, so as usual, we have the supply of labor here. Also, we have the demand for labor, and the demand for labor, you know already, it is MRPL. Okay, and at the same time, we also have the marginal revenue. So this one is actually the marginal revenue. You have demand, you have marginal revenue, isn't it? Okay, now we have you assume that the seller, the laborers, or the household has three different types of objectives. The first one, if the seller or the labor or the labor union wants to make sure that more and more workers being hired, okay, then there's a way to find it. There's a way to find wage rate. We follow this condition. Okay, so I'm talking about second point here. The condition is supply must be equal to demand at this point. Then we can get wage rate here, which is W star, and then we can get the highest number of labor hired. let's say L star. Okay, so that's the first objective that can be applied by the seller or labor union. But let's say um, instead of getting more and more people employed in this market, let's say the labor union has different objectives. The second objective is labor union wants to make sure that those who work in this market or supply labor in this market get the job, and not only getting the job, but they can maximize the rent earned. Okay, so how to do that? Okay, to maximize the rent earned here, you need to follow this condition. It is at the intersection between marginal revenue and supply of labor curve. Okay, so we have marginal revenue here, and then we have supply, so it is here, isn't it? So you can find L1 here. Where is the wage rate? The wage rate is on the demand of for labor, and then we call it W1. So where is the rent? If I extend the supply curve, the rent is actually given by this trapezoid. Okay, so this one. Okay, but if we have the third type of objective by labor union, what is that third type? They want to maximize total wages or total income paid to workers so that workers can receive higher income. All right. Now, in order to do that, we must follow the third condition here. The third condition is find the point where marginal revenue to the union will be zero. Where is it? This is marginal revenue curve. It becomes zero when it is here. Okay. And then you can find that this one is L2. So where is the wage rate paid? The wage rate paid must be on the demand curve for labor. So wage 2. Okay. Now, why this condition where marginal revenue equal to zero becomes the condition that can allow us to receive the maximum total income or wages paid to workers? You have total revenue curve. Let's say total revenue curve looks like this. The maximum point is here, isn't it? So the maximum point here, you can see the slope here is zero. Slope of total revenue is zero. And the slope of total revenue is nothing else but the marginal revenue, isn't it? So I hope you understand why marginal revenue equals to zero becomes the condition to maximize total wage. Now, total wage here is actually the total revenue received by the workers. Now, lastly, we want to look at the unionized and non-unionized workers. For a labor market, labor is the very specific human inputs in the factor markets because labor can speak and labor can express their dissatisfaction if they are not happy at the workplace. So, uh, in any workplace, usually we have union for labor. We call it labor union or trade union. Okay, but there are some people who don't want to be in the union. However, it is encouraged for any workers to be in the union because from there you can discuss more about the your welfare and your grievances, and also beneficial discussion with your employers and whatnot. Okay. However, of course, in any firm we have unionized and non-unionized workers. Same is happening in UIA or in IIUM, where we have some lecturers who are not become a member of ASA or Academic Society Association. All right, now, anyway, so we just want to show you the wage discrimination in unionized and non-unionized sector. So let's say we have wage rate here, and then we have a number of workers. Okay, so let's say number of workers in this sector is fixed for simplification. Okay, so supply of labor. Total demand for labor is this one. Okay, but we have two groups of workers or labor, unionized and non-unionized. What do you think? The demand for labor for unionized is more or less than the demand for labor for non-unionized? Usually for any firm, they prefer those who are not unionized. Why? Because less bargaining power, easy to dictate them, I can pay them lower wage rate, so on and so forth. So in this case, we understand that Unionized is less demanded by firm than non-unionized. Okay, so if that is the case, then we have to draw the demand curve for both of them, and both of them should more or less look like this. Okay, so the non-unionized one, so perhaps looks like this. Okay, demand for non-unionized, and the unionized one perhaps looks like this. Okay, so demand for unionized. Now, if you look here, in the market we have a supply of labor which is fixed, and this is a total supply, which is a vertical line, and then the downsloping demand for labor for total. And in the market, if we follow the market rate without taking care whether they are unionized or not, then the wage rate should be somewhere here. Okay, but then so you can see that the demand for unionized worker could be here. I wouldn't label it because I just don't want to have a mess in drawing. And then the demand for non-unionized should be here, isn't it? Okay. However, everybody knows that when it comes to trade union, unionized workers are very strong in terms of bargaining power. So that what they'll do is that they feel like W star is a very low wage rate, so they request, the employer to increase the salary. So let's say increase somewhere here. Okay, and then we have W, U here. So, but what happens here is that initially the demand for unionized worker is here, isn't it? Is here, but now it reduces here. So what happens here is that there is a reduction in the unionized labor here, reduction. Okay, and this reduction basically a shortage for for firm. So how do they replace this shortage, or solve this shortage problem? What they can do is that, because usually non-unionized, they are not united in terms of the right of having higher wage rate and so on and so forth. So it's easy for the firm to reduce their wage rate here. Let's say somewhere here below the market price, non-unionized, isn't it? So here you have increase in the labor of non-unionized. So as you can see here, okay, market rate is at W star. However, unionized worker receive WU, which is greater than WNU, isn't it, for non-unionized? And at the same time here, we have reduction in, unionized worker given by, let's say, the symbol. And then we also have increase in the, employment of non-unionized worker, and then it has been offset. Okay, it has been offset, let's say, by the same amount. So here, this is the impact of wage discrimination in the unionized and non-unionized sector. So wage discrimination appears here because you see the difference between WU and WNU. That's why whenever there's a difference here, then we call it discrimination. Okay, so that's the end of chapter